do is, first of all, I'm going to run through what you might need for your basic sewing kit. And then I am going to tell you a little bit about fabrics. And then we're going to do a little bit of pinning. And then I'm going to take you through the sewing machine. So I'll take you through kind of the anatomy of the sewing machine and how to thread it up. And I'll answer any questions along the way. So if anybody has any questions, please pop them in the chat. Every now and then I will just go back and have a little look and see if I've missed anything. And then at the very end, I'll also share my contact details with you. So if there's anything that I've not had time to cover, you can always email me and I'll cover it off for you separately as well. And then once I've been through the sewing machine, we've threaded it up, the top thread and the bobbin underneath as well. I'm going to make a cushion cover, show you how to do that. So yes, Libby, it should be all good with video. Auto threader tips. Okay, do you know what? I don't like my auto needle threader, but I will show you how to do it because some people love it. Right, okay, let's get cracking. So basic sewing kit, if you're a real beginner, because I'm really conscious that we might have people at all different stages of their sewing adventures. There are a few things that you really need. So first of all, some pins. So I always recommend glass-headed pins because I don't like ironing very much, but when I'm sewing, I iron quite a lot because it really makes a difference to the finished look of whatever you're sewing if you iron as you go along. If you imagine trying to kind of wiggle your iron into something which is completed, it's really hard. Whereas if you iron something as you go, it's much easier to iron seams open as you go. So if you have glass-headed pins, you're not going to risk melting your pins because plastic-headed pins will melt under the iron. So pins is a definite must. Some really good fabric scissors, nice large fabric scissors that you only use for fabric, and don't let anybody else use them for anything other than fabric or thread. Don't let them near tape or paper or anything like that. Something to mark your fabric with, so tailor's chalk or a fabric pen. I really like these friction pens. I think they're really brilliant. You don't always get them in the sewing department. If you type in friction pen, that's Frixion. They're brilliant because you can draw onto fabric and it's just like a normal pen, and then if you iron over the top of your pen, it completely disappears. So they're really good. Then what else do you need? Oh, tape measure. Tape measure is a really handy thing to have. You definitely need that. You might also, if you do lots of sewing, fancy a rotary cutter. So I actually usually use my rotary cutter instead of my scissors. If you do have a rotary cutter, you would also need a ruler, so a quilting ruler, and a mat like this one here to cut on. I do recommend it, but you definitely don't need that. So scissors are absolutely fine. Embroidery scissors are also really useful. And then finally, an unpicker is really handy as well. Sorry, I'm just looking at so Libby can't seem to see my visuals. Okay, most people I think can see my video fine. So I'm just going to crack on. Anybody who can't see the video, I'm very sorry. It seems to be fine at this end, but everybody's going to get the recording, the video afterwards. So if there's any trouble and you can't see me, maybe just wait for the video afterwards. I'll send it to everybody and you'll be able to see me then. Pinking shears. Yeah, I don't really use pinking shears very much, but you can use pinking shears to stop your fabric fraying. I usually do zigzag stitch at the edge of my sewing to stop it from fraying, but you can use pinking shears if you like. Okay, so that's kind of the basic kit. Fabric. So when you're starting out, it's much easier to use fabrics which are really as stable as possible. So I would go for nothing stretchy at the beginning, and also nothing that's either too heavyweight and avoid anything that's really flimsy as well. So a really nice kind of quilting weight cotton is brilliant. Like a linen is really great, or a linen cotton mix is really nice as well. Gingham is lovely to sew with because it's got nice straight lines already woven into the fabric, so they're easy to follow. A light denim is really nice. So anything like that is really good. If you imagine, you know, if it's something really, really flimsy, it's much, much harder to work with than something that's nice and stable like a cotton like this. So I'd say start off with something like that and you can work towards stretchy or thinner or thicker fabrics afterwards. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to be using to make the cushion cover today. And what we're going to do first of all is we're going to, so I'll tell you at the end of the workshop, when I send you the video recording, I'll also send you a workbook that accompanies this workshop, and it will go through everything that I talk about, and it will also take you through in detail how to make the cushion cover as well, so you can do it in your own time and as many times as you like. So we're going to make an envelope cushion cover. So it's really, really simple to do. It's a really lovely project because actually, if you do it outside of this workshop with no other distractions, you'll find that you can make one really quickly. So it's a brilliant starter project, and they make lovely gifts as well. And it's a nice thing just to make for your home if you wanted to. And you feel very satisfied without too much trouble. So we're going to make a square cushion cover, but actually you can make a rectangular one if you want. So first of all, you need to cut out a rectangle of fabric. Now the fabric needs to be the width of the final cushion plus 3 centimeters. So that's allowing for 1.5 centimeters seam allowance on either side. So if you wanted to make a 40 centimeter wide cushion cover, you'd cut your fabric to 43 centimeters wide. And then the length of the cushion cover, sorry, the length of the fabric needs to be the final length of your cushion times by, what did I say? 2.55, I think. Yes, 2.55. So for me, I've got a 30 centimeter wide cushion cover. So I've cut this to, I can't remember whatever. If you've got a 40 centimeter wide long cushion cover, you'd cut your fabric to, I think it's 102 centimeters, but 2.55 times the final length. And what that's going to allow for is the seam allowances on the end and also the fold over for the envelope of the cushion as well. This is all in the handout. You don't need to write these things down, but I'm just saying it out loud in case anybody wants to work along. In fact, I might write it in the chat. So the width equals the final cushion width times, plus 3 centimeters. And the length is final length times 2.55. There we go, just in case anyone wants to make along. Okay, so I'm actually going to make it with plain white fabric today because that means that you'll be able to see my sewing really, really neatly. So really clearly, sorry. So what we're going to do first of all is take one of the short ends of the fabric and fold it over by a double 1.5 centimeter seam allowance towards the wrong side of the fabric. So if I was using this fabric, I would fold it over a double 1.5 centimeter in this direction. So it's towards the wrong side of the fabric. The easiest way to measure your seam allowance is not to try and measure it like this and then fold it over. It's actually to fold it first and then adjust your fold so that that is 1.5 centimeters. So there we go. So I know that that there is 1.5 centimeters, and I'm going to fold it over twice. Oops. And pop a pin in. And then I'll do the same up the top, up this end here as well. So I'll fold it over once. Check my hem is 1.5 centimeters. Yes, it is. And then fold it over again. So 1.5 centimeters tends to be the standard amount of seam allowance that you'll find, certainly when you're making garments, if anybody wants to venture into making clothes. just to say, so I've done one at the top and one at the bottom, because this is quite small. What I can then do is just kind of stretch it a little bit. And because this is a really stable fabric with no stretch, that will then give me the right amount in the middle. We can just double check it and I can adjust if necessary. It was a tiny little bit too big. There we go. Okay, so we're all good. If you're making this in your own time at home, what you need to do is probably press this at this point. So get your iron and press it down on both sides. And that is going to give you a really nice finish at the end, but I'm not going to do that today because I don't really have time. So I'll do the same on the other side. I don't know about switching on your camera, Leslie. Can everybody else see me and not themselves? So Leslie, if there is a problem with your video, what I will do at the very end, as per usual, is I'll download the video for you and I'll share it with everybody. So if there is a problem with your video, it might be a good idea to, well, you could try logging off and logging in again, seeing if that helps. Maybe go into your settings, but otherwise you will get the video of me, rest assured. Okay, good. Sorry, Leslie. Maybe have a little go at that. Right, so same on this end. Now, a little word on pinning, okay? So when you pin with your sewing, you'll see people pin in various different ways. So you might see some people, oh, what am I doing? There we go. That looks a bit weird. 1, 2. You might see some people pin crossways. Let me just check I've got that right. Yeah, 1. So you might see some people put their pins in a bit like this, kind of horizontally, and then stitch straight over them. You can do that. Certainly some people will teach you to do it in that way, but I think it's much better to sew down and then take your pins out as you go, because if you're going around a kind of fiddly corner or something, or your fabric is a little bit thinner, you'll find that if you keep your pins in and you stitch over them, that you might get puckering on your fabric, or you might even sew into one of the pins and then cause the needle to snap, which nobody wants. It's horrible when that happens. So you want to try and eliminate that from happening. The direction that I always put my pins in is I have my bulk of my fabric to my left and put the points of the pins facing away from me. And that means as I put my fabric into the sewing machine and I'm sewing down this way, I can just pull the pins out as I go. If you imagine that one of the pins or any of the pins were facing in that direction, you'd sew down, stop here, and then kind of have to wiggle your hand in between the sewing presser foot and the pin to try and take it out. So it's a really great habit to get into if you can have it so bulk of the fabric's on the left and the points facing away from you, and then you'll always be able to just pull the pins out as you go. Okay, so this fabric is now ready for sewing, so we can place that to one side and start to go through the sewing machine. So I'll bring the machine over. I think the majority of people, oh, I do use the clips, Bernie. I love them, actually. I do really love using the clips. I just haven't got them in this office, in this sewing room today. They're in my other one. But yeah, I do find the clips really, really handy. They're kind of like, have I got any here? Oh yeah, here's one. They look like this. For anybody who's not seen them, little kind of plastic clips. So you use them in this way. So you'll clip your fabric instead of pinning it, and then you just pull the clips, you just take the clips out as you go, like that there. So they're really good for lots of different reasons. So firstly, it means that you're not making any pinholes in your fabric at all. So if you've got, say, like one of those kind of oilclothy type fabrics, it means that you're not going to get any holes in the oilcloth. So that's really, really good. And also some people just find them easier to work with. So yeah, do find them really useful. Right, I think a lot of you have got a Singer sewing machine because lots of you have booked on with via the Singer outlet or the crafting outlet. So I'm going to use a Singer to show you threading up. threading up the sewing machine. So hopefully that will mimic quite a lot of the machines that you're all using at home. Okay, so let's start to go through the anatomy of the machine, and I'll tell you what's going on with everything. So I'll try and keeping my eye on the chat. So just pop any questions in there and I'll get to them if I can. I'm going to unthread it actually. Let's do that now so that I can thread it with you together. Oops. Sorry, it's hard doing things to one side. Okay. Right, so first of all, let's start at the top. So we have got up here, this is where you might have another one that's vertical here. These are the prongs where the spool thread goes. So that's the first thing that I'm going to say. Oh, I'm not going to cover embroidery machines. And no, they are very different to regular sewing machines. I have actually asked the crafting outlet and the Singer outlet if we can do a specific embroidery machine session. So maybe if you want to go onto my mailing list, if you go to makerykate.com, I'll put it in the email as well at the end, and sign up for my newsletter. If I do manage to get an embroidery machine specific workshop, I will send you the details of it. Right, my first point actually, and I'll try and cover things like this off, like useful little tidbits of information that are just going to make your sewing life a bit easier. I'll try and drop them in throughout the workshop, because the main thing, and it happens a lot, it happens all the time to all sorts of people, but yes, you'll still get the video, Leslie, is that as you're sewing, for some complete unknown reason, all of a sudden it will just start going funny, and the stitches will start getting a bit loopy, or your fabric will start getting chewed up. So as I go through, I will try and impart as many different things as I can to help you stop that from happening. And the first thing is the thread that you use. So it makes a really big difference if you can use good quality thread. I pretty much always use Gutermann thread. This is the 100% polyester thread, which is absolutely brilliant. I really like it. If I have used cheap threads in my machine, I have noticed the difference. And you always want to make sure you're using the same thread on the top as what you're using on the bobbin underneath as well. So that's my very first tip to try and help you with trying to keep your machine nice and handy. Nice and smooth. So these prongs up here are what you put your threads on, your spool thread onto. This one here, this little metal one, sorry, the Singer SE9185, I don't know which machine that is. I'm just going through regular sewing machines. So if that's a different type of sewing machine, maybe email me about it separately and I'll see if I know about it. But yeah. This prong up here is what you use to wind the bobbin thread, which looks like this. So I'm going to go through how to do that in a minute. You've got various different hooks and things around here, which have usually got little arrows next to them. And they are what we use to thread the machine. So when we go through threading the machine in a moment, I'll tell you about those. This here is the tension dial. So when you've got your sewing machine, my best advice is not to touch the tension dial if you can help it, because if you start messing around with the tension, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get back to being perfect again. So when you've got your brand new machine, if you've got a new machine that you're working with, it will have come with the tension spot on, calibrated perfectly for your machine for kind of regular sewing. The only time you'll need to change it is if you're using very, very flimsy fabric or very, very thick fabric. Or if you notice that it's been knocked and all of a sudden your sewing isn't looking like it should. So when I say that, I mean that either your top stitches, the stitches above on the top of your fabric, or the stitches underneath are excessively loopy. So one of the threads, so the spool thread might be very, very tight, and the bottom bobbin threads will be very, very loopy, or vice versa. What this tension dial here does is it adjusts the rate at which this spool thread goes through your machine. So if it's tighter tension, then this spool thread will go through more slowly, and if it's a looser tension, then your spool thread's going to go through more freely. So that's going to affect the neatness and the evenness of your stitching. So what you want, if you do notice, do everything else first. So make sure that you've got good quality thread, that it's the same thread top and bottom, and all the other things that I'm going to go through as we work through the workshop. And if you've dressed all of those other things first, then you can start having a little play around with your tension dial. And what I would advise you to do is just get a scrap piece of fabric, fold it in half, so you've got a double layer of fabric, and move your tension dial very, very slightly, so half a point. So say at the moment mine's set to number 4, which is the correct tension for this machine. So I'd maybe move it to 3.5 or 4.5, depending on which threads are loopy, and then have a little sew. Take it out of the machine, see how it is. If it looks a little bit better, keep going in the same direction. If it doesn't, go and try in the other directions, and keep having a little play until you find that your stitching is correct again. So that should work. There's also, you can also adjust the bobbin tension. That's different on different machines. So I might just, usually I don't go through that on this workshop. What I'll do is I'll include all of that in your workbook that you'll get afterwards as well. Actually, I've also got I tell you what, I've also got a really good video that I'll share with you as well in the email at the very end. And it's an email, it's a workbook, a video, sorry, all about maintaining your machine, so keeping it in the best working order that you possibly can. So I'll include that video in the workshop at the very end as well, because I won't have time to go through all of that today. Okay, so that's your tension dial. Don't touch it if you can possibly help it. If you do touch it, to do small increments at once and test your sewing on a scrap piece of fabric. Okay, this here on this machine, we have a speed selector for the sewing. You don't have that in all machines. It's really brilliant if you have got it. So if you're just starting out, you have it on slow. If you're very confident, you can move it to fast. I'm going to keep mine somewhere in the middle for now. Over here on the right hand side, this is going to look different depending on what type of machine you've got, if you've got a mechanical machine or an electronic machine. But the icons will look the same. So you will have something with a zigzag that starts wide and then gets narrow, and you will have another dial or buttons that have a line, a straight line that starts long and then gets short. So those are your stitch width and your stitch length. So the stitch length, imagine if you just have a straight line, and a straight line, the straight stitch is the stitch that you're going to use, I would guess, more than any other stitch on your sewing machine. You want to have that set to somewhere in the middle. But if you are starting out, I would say start with a slightly longer stitch, because if you do make a mistake, it's much, much easier to unpick your stitching if you've got longer stitches rather than if you've got smaller stitches. So if you're starting out, I would start with your, once you've turned your sewing machine on, to have your stitch, oh, here it is. Stitch, sorry, I'm just going to plug this one in now so that I can show you this. Your stitch length, probably about 3.5 to starting out, and then you can work down towards a 3 or even a 2.5 once you've got started. This might not be the right power cable for this. Oh, turn it on and see what happens. Is it happy? Yes, it is. Okay, so it's set to straight stitch at the moment, and I have got my, I can't see it very well. So to make the stitch longer, I would press the plus button against that straight line that gets longer and shorter, and to make the stitch length shorter, you'd press the minus button. The zigzag, obviously, if the stitch width, if you've got a straight line of running stitch, obviously you can't make that wider or narrower because it's just a straight line. So that more will affect your stitches like a zigzag stitch, which is the type of stitch that you're going to use if you're using stretch fabric, or if you want to stop your fabric from fraying. You might want to zigzag down an edge to stop the fabric from fraying. However, the stitch width actually is sometimes quite useful if you are doing a straight stitch, because what that will do is it will move the needle to the left and right. So when you select your straight stitch, it will automatically put the needle in the center position. But you might want to move your stitching slightly further to the left or slightly further to the right. So by adjusting the stitch width, even on a straight stitch, what you'll do, you might be able to see it now if you look at my needle over here. You probably can't. Oh yeah, actually you might be able to, because as I'm moving that button and changing the stitch width, my needle over here is going to the left and to the right. If you've got a zigzag, so usually you want it to be in the middle, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go further on. But if you've got a zigzag stitch, what you want to do is play around with that stitch setting of the width to make your zigzag as wide as you'd like it to be. When you select your zigzag stitch, it will automatically select what it thinks is kind of an average zigzag stitch for you, but you can play around with it if you like. So again, my best advice there is to just get a piece of fabric, fold it over so you've got double layer of fabric, and select the zigzag, do a little bit of stitching, adjust the length and the width to see how that changes the stitches, and have another little sew and just see how you get on. These buttons under here are all the stitch selector buttons. So I'm not going to play around with those now, but you'll have different stitches available to you depending on which sewing machine you've got. And you might have little pictures of those stitches next to the buttons, or you might have, like on this machine, there are some little kind of cards that you pull out down here that show you all the different stitches. You'll probably find that you don't use the vast majority of the stitches on your sewing machine unless you want to do nice decorative stitching down, I don't know, the sides of some napkins or along the bottom of a skirt for a child or something. But generally speaking, you will use your straight stitch and your zigzag stitch. I'm just going to be using straight stitch today because I don't want to overcomplicate matters. But in the workbook that I'll send you, I will touch on things like the zigzag stitch as well. I might also put together some other videos at some point of things like how to use the blind hem stitch and various other stitches that come with your machine as well. So if you do want to hear about that, again, sign up to my mailing list. Just go to makerykate.com. I think in the top right hand corner, it's got a mailing list option, and I'll make sure that if I do record those little videos, I'll send those to you as well. Okay, so that's this section over here, which is all your stitch selection and stitch width and stitch length. Over here, it's usually somewhere around here. It's somewhere here. You will have a reverse button. So it's a button here. Sometimes it's a little lever that comes down, and that looks like this one here. So it's a line of stitching that goes up and then it does a U-turn, and it's got an arrow on the bottom. That is the reverse button. So I use the reverse stitch to secure my stitching at the beginning and at the end of any line of stitching that I do. It's the quickest way and the most secure way to quickly secure your stitching and make sure that it doesn't come undone. There is another way to do it as well, which is sometimes a bit neater. So I'll show you that when we start sewing. And we'll have a practice in a minute of doing some sewing, and I can show you different things. But that is the reverse button. You may also have a needle up, needle down button. I'll show you that one here. Ooh, I accidentally pressed it with my hand. That it's got a picture of a needle and then an up arrow and a down arrow. That will mean that at the end of any line of stitching, your needle will either finish in the fabric or it will finish out of the fabric. Obviously, if you want to finish your line of stitching and you've finished and you want to remove your fabric from the machine, you want your needle to be in the uppermost position. So you might need to press that button, that needle up down button again at the end of your sewing. But if you're doing a piece of sewing and you want to turn a corner, then you would need your needle to be down in the lowermost position so that you can pivot your fabric. So that up down button, if you've got it on your sewing machine, can be really, really handy for either pivoting and turning a corner on your stitching or raising it up to finish your sewing. This machine has also got a start stop function, so it will sew automatically without the pedal, but again, I'm not going to do that today. We're going to sew with the pedal today, because it's kind of the more common thing, and I think it's probably the best way to learn. I think doing it with just the buttons sometimes can be a bit I don't know, you're like, stop, don't want to go in that direction. Okay, so that's all of the buttons and things up here. You've also got a really, really important item on your sewing machine, which is the flywheel over here. So what this will do, you always want to get into the habit of bringing this towards you. So if you turn it away from you, what you're asking the sewing machine to do is kind of push the thread back in reverse the way that it's just come. And that is another way that you might find that you come unstuck with your sewing and the thread gets a bit chewed up. So if you always get into the habit of bringing this wheel towards you, you'll just find that you're eliminating another way of getting knots in your sewing. I use this wheel all the time. So I begin every single piece of sewing with the wheel rather than by putting my foot on the pedal. And because what that means is that I have complete control over where the needle's going into the fabric, the speed that I'm going in, and the direction that I'm going in. So that's another really, really good habit to get into, to just do your first couple of stitches with the wheel by bringing it towards you, so you've got complete control over where you're going. Also, if you're going around quite maybe a corner or a tight curve, you can take your foot off the pedal and just use the wheel, bring it towards you to do a few stitches. It means, again, you've got complete control over going around a tricky corner rather than pushing down on your pedal. Okay, so that's everything over here. And then I'll just show you a few little bits down here where the business end is. So this is the presser foot. So you get various different types of presser feet. This is the standard one that comes with your sewing machine. If you press this little lever at the back here, you should remove the presser foot, and that's because there's a little claw under here, and that lever at the back will open and close the claw that grip onto this bar along here on the center of the presser foot. This is a standard presser foot. So it's got a little hole in the middle, which is where your needle goes down in through that hole in the middle. And then it's got metal on either side, which will hold your fabric in place. Let me push that back onto the little claw again. Oh, sorry, it's a two-handed job. Actually, no, whilst I'm at it, I'll show you something else. So under here are some, I've got to be careful because the machine's on, but there are some little teeth under here, and they are called the feed dog. And those teeth, if I move the wheel, you might see those teeth coming up and down, or you can do the same on your machine at home. They don't just go up and down, but as you're sewing, what those teeth do are they kind of go like this. So they don't just go up and down, they also go along, and that's what will pull the fabric through your sewing machine. So when you're sewing, you need to really just focus on going left and right, steering it. You don't want to be pulling or pushing the fabric through the machine. The machine will do that for you at the right rate. You just want to be steering it, because those feed dog, the teeth underneath, they'll pull the fabric through the sewing machine. So that's what they're there for. And then you will also see on this plate here, to the left and right of the presser foot, there are some lines with numbers against them, and they are what you use to measure your seam allowance. So you'll see one just to the right hand side of the presser foot that's got a number 1 next to it. That is the 1 centimetre seam allowance line. So if you want to sew with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, this is all in your handbook, so don't worry too much, but you would sew with your fabric, the edge of your fabric lined up against that 1 centimetre line. And then as long as your needle is in the centre position, you've not moved around the stitch width to move your needle left or right, it means that your sewing is going to be 1 centimetre away from the edge of the fabric. We're going to sew with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, so I'm going to move my fabric along a little bit further to that 1.5 line, and then when we sew we'll be 1.5 centimetres in from the edge of the fabric, aka a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. The other thing I've not shown you, which is really important, which is under here, this lever, which is usually in the middle in this round bit here, and that's what lowers and raises the presser foot. Can you see as I lower and raise, my presser foot goes up and down? You can't sew with your presser foot raised, so you must always have it up when you put your fabric in underneath the presser foot, and then when you're ready to go, you lower the presser foot down, and then you can start sewing. If you were to try and sew with the presser foot up, you'll get into a terrible mess, and it will get really knotty, and it just won't be happy at all. I've just seen a question about the little spring. So this little spring here at the back, you'll only use that if you're sewing with really thick fabrics, or you'll say you're going you're approaching a hem which has got a few layers of fabric. So what this at the moment, when you're sewing, your presser foot will kind of go up and down over seams and over pins if you're sewing over pins, whatever it is. If you push that little spring in when you're sewing, then what it will do is it will hold the presser foot in the uppermost position, and so that means that when you're going over a chunky hem, it won't do this. It will kind of it will find its way over that hem much more easily. You don't need to worry about it too much. Don't worry. I rarely use it, and certainly if you're just starting off, it's not something that you need to be worried about. Okay, so that is the main anatomy of the sewing machine, apart from this bit here, which is where your bobbin goes. So most of you, I think, will have a top loading bobbin, which is this one here. If anybody has got a front loader, maybe you could pop that in the chat, and I will cover that if you need me to. So a top loader is where you have a see-through case up here and you drop your bobbin straight down into it. If you've got a front loader, what you'll have is you'll take this arm off and you'll have a little door here that you open up, and you put your bobbin into a little bobbin case into the front. Top loaders are far preferable, if you ask me. So I think most of you will have it, because most machines now tend to be more top loader. But yeah, just pop it into the chat if you've got a front loader, and I'll make sure I cover that off as well. So your bobbin, this thread here, the front, that's fine. I can see that at least one person has got a front loader, so I will cover that off for you as well in a minute. So that's where your bobbin is going to go in there, and so that's what that little gap is for. So that's kind of all the anatomy of the sewing machine. So what we're going to do now is, actually what we'll do first is cool. Okay, Pat and Alex, do not worry. When I'm threading up in a minute, I will do the top loader first, and then I'll follow on with the front loader, so I can go through that for you as well. Okay, I'm not going to thread the machine up first. What I'm going to do before anything else is wind thread onto a bobbin so that you can see how to do that. Because like I said, it's really important, if you can, to have the same thread for your bobbin and your spool at the top. Let me see if I can find a fresh bobbin. Let's see if there's one down here. Hang on a moment. No. Okay. Which is the most empty? That one. Just going to undo that one. Oopsie. Right, any other questions whilst I'm just doing this? I think we're up to date. Okay, there might be another reason for that if your tension's really bad, because that's not right if it's a new machine. So I'll keep going through all the different things that you can do to make sure that the tension's right, and hopefully we'll find another reason. Because that sounds a bit strange. If there's a problem with it, I'd get back to wherever you purchased it from, but let's go through first and you'll see. Okay, so this is a fresh bobbin. You will have got some bobbins with your machine. Bobbins come in different sizes, so make sure that you get the right size for your machine when you want to get any more. So what we want to do, first of all, is place the bobbin on here. Do you know what? I'm worried that this is the wrong power cable for this machine. So I'm just going to wind the bobbin on my other one because I don't want it to go crazy. Ooh. Here we go. It's the same principle for all of them, so don't worry. I'm not sure if I've got the right power cable for that one, and I don't want it to go wrong. Okay, so over here on the right hand side on the top of your machine, you'll have a prong that's sticking out, which is much shorter, and kind of a disc underneath, which is pretty much the same size as your bobbin. So you want to push your bobbin down onto that little prong on the top right hand side of your sewing machine. Then get your spool thread and pop it onto one of these prongs on the top. You might have one that's going sideways. If you have one that's going sideways, you'll have a cap that goes on the edge of the prong. You need to make sure that the cap is more or less the same diameter as the width of the spool that you're putting onto the prong if it's a sideways one. So this is a really large cap. So this would be for a very large spool that I put onto one of those prongs, but you will have received different sized caps with your sewing machine. So to select the one that's the closest to the diameter of the spool, if you've got one of those sideways prongs on the top of your sewing machine. Okay. So very beautifully, it has arrows and instructions for you to show you kind of where to put your thread. But you want to take your spool thread, and with this machine, and with all of your machines, it will have a nice little diagram over here, but there will be probably something for you to go under and then around and then go back over to where your bobbin is. So if you just follow the directions on your sewing machine, little diagram, here's the one here, it's slightly different on my Singer, but again, it's got a nice little diagram in place. And then you go back over to where your bobbin is, and you want to secure the end of your thread with your bobbin. So what I do is I usually take one of the ends, and there should be some holes in the bobbin, so I'll thread it through a hole and then just start winding it around myself, probably about 10 times, just to hold it in place, and then pop it back onto the that little prong over there. And once you've done that, you need to push that bobbin over to the right like that. And then you'll see there should be another piece of plastic here, or metal. And what that does is, so that first of all engages your machine and lets your machine know that what you want to do is wind your bobbin. And then what it will also do, very cleverly, is once you've got a full bobbin, it will automatically stop and push your bobbin back left so that it stops winding it. In some machines, I don't think any of you will have a machine like this, but I'm just going to mention it just in case, because in certain machines, you also have to pull out that flywheel to your right, facing the machine, And what that does is it disengages all of the needles and everything down here, so that your machine knows that it just needs to wind the bobbin. It's not actually sewing a seam now, but give it a little pull. If it doesn't go, that's fine. Your machine doesn't do that. So, but as long as you've pushed your bobbin over to the right hand side, it knows that you want to wind your bobbin. So I'm going to plug this one in, and then you can push down on the pedal. And you might also need to just hold your hand over the top of your spool. Oh, turn it on. Turn it on first, obviously. Hold the hand over the top of the spool, and then put your foot down, and you can just go nice and fast. And then that will wind your bobbin up. Clockwise, yes. Wind it clockwise, absolutely, Cherie. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay. I'm going to stop there, I reckon, or a little bit more. Stop about there. But if you keep going all the way to the end, if you want a full bobbin, then it would automatically stop for you. So when you've finished, push that back over, lift it off, and then you can just cut your thread. And you can also cut this, if you did poke it through the hole, you can just cut that end as well. So you've got a nice bobbin of thread that matches the spool thread. Okay, so that will be the same for all your machines, whether it's front loader or top loader. So what I'll do now is thread up the machine. So again, I'm going to do that on the Singer because I think that's what most of you have got. So I'll bring that back up here. Okay. So where's my other bobbin? My other spool cap, I wonder. Not there. Oh well. Never mind. I'll explain it to you. Okay, so we're going to thread up the spool first of all. So let's take the spool thread, pop it onto the prong. So if you've got a horizontal one, it goes along like that. If it's a vertical one, it goes somewhere in here. I don't know where my vertical one's gone. They come out from, I know where it is. It's over there. I might go and get it actually. Oh no, it doesn't matter. But if you've got a vertical one, it just sits like this. Horizontal one, it goes like that. But you need to put the cap on if you've got a horizontal one. I can only see this large cap next to me, but I'm not going to sew with this machine today. So you would have a smaller cap and put that on to match your spool. Okay. And then your sewing machine has got diagrams and arrows to show you exactly where it needs to go. But it's pretty much the same for all machines in terms of the actual kind of directions and the number of ups and downs that you do. So first of all, you will have something up here, usually a piece of plastic or metal that you want to go underneath. You will have again a diagram, and on this diagram it should have this, it's got two threads going here. If there's one with a dotted line, the dotted line is the diagram that you follow for winding your bobbin, which we just did, and then the solid line is the one that you follow for threading your machine. So the solid line for me here is going underneath this little piece of metal here, which is a little extra guard, which is not on all machines, so you might not have that little guard there. And then the solid line is going, you can see that solid line there is going across and straight down. That across is going underneath this piece of plastic here, might be metal on your machine, and then straight down this gap in the sewing machine here. When you thread up your sewing machine, you're always going to go from right to left. So you always want to go down this first groove in the sewing machine first of all, and then when you get to the bottom of this groove, there will be an arrow doing a U-turn and telling you to go back up again. So we'll take the thread and we'll go back up here to the top, and there will be a metal hook here. If you can't see a metal hook, what you need to do is bring the wheel over here on the right hand side of the machine towards you until that metal hook is poking its head up above the sewing machine. And then again from right to left, take your thread and go under the hook. There we go. So I'm going under the hook, and now my thread is going through the little hole at the front of this metal hook from right to left. And then again, there's a little arrow here. Don't worry, you're going to get the recording. If you're not keeping up, it's fine. You can watch it back as many times as you like. There's another arrow here that's doing another U-turn and telling us to go back. So we go back down the way that we just came through that same second groove gap in the sewing machine, back down to the bottom. And now the arrow here is telling me just to go straight down. So what we want to do is go straight down to the needle. So you might have a couple of guards here. So there's one bit of metal here that's going across. I'm going to take my thread and wind it so it's going behind, just move it so it's going behind that guard. And what that will do is it will just keep everything, you know, on track as you're sewing. It will mean your thread's not going to kind of start waving around all over the place. And then it's time to thread your needle. So you want to thread the needle front to back. So I really dislike my needle threader, and I just literally make sure that I've cut a really nice clean end of my thread and thread it front to back. If you've got an automatic needle threader, let me just see if I can, because I don't know if I can do this back to front. Oh golly, hang on, let me just try it here. See how we go. Oh God, I hate doing automatic needle threaders. What I might do, because it's also going to be really hard to show you on here, I think I might show you a close-up video. I'll shoot on my phone a really close-up video of doing the auto needle threader and send that in your email at the end as well, and then you can see it really nice and close up, because I really dislike it. Let me try one more time. Oh gosh, no, I don't want to do it. Okay, I've had them break so many times, you see. I just don't like them. Some people love them. Yours might be great. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Okay, so that's threading the top spool thread on a sewing machine. So I'm just going to thread the needle now myself, front to back. So that's how you do that, irrespective of whether you have a front loader or a top loading sewing machine. So now let's go on to threading the bobbin. Okay, so oh, I'm glad. Thank you, Willow, for saying that. I shouldn't have said that. Automatic needle threaders are brilliant. They just don't agree with me. I'll show you a close-up video. Okay, so a top loading bobbin. Let me just bring, I'm going to redirect my light to try and make it a little bit brighter for you. Hang on a mo. I think we can do a little bit better than that. There we go. Oops. There we go. Is that a little bit brighter? Yes, I think it is. Yeah. Okay, so with a top loading bobbin, you'll have a little plastic case over the top, which will have a little, either a little button to release it like that. It might be at the front. With some, you just kind of pull the plastic cover towards you, which is the same as on the brother one that I'll show you in a minute. But you'll need to release that case first of all to reveal the bit under here, which is where the bobbin goes. Then, which was my spool, there. You get your bobbin, your fully wound bobbin. Yeah, don't worry, Selena. I will make sure I send you a video as well. It's okay. And then you take your bobbin. Oh, hang on a minute. I need to. It's tricky to do this the wrong way around. Let me just see. Okay, so you take your bobbin and you want to have it so that, imagine I'm pulling the bobbin thread now. The bobbin thread is falling down the left-hand side of my bobbin. So if I was to pull that thread, it's going to start going in an anti-clockwise motion and then drop it down. Is that right? Sorry, I'm looking. Yeah, that is right. Sorry, it's funny when you do stuff back to front. But yeah, so an anti-clockwise motion when you pull your thread. So I've dropped my bobbin down into that hole here underneath. When I pull it, I can see that the bobbin's moving in an anti-clockwise motion. You then need to take your thread, which is here, and you need to hook it underneath this piece of plastic, again with an arrow on it. So usually it's kind of a piece of plastic or metal that's kind of jutting out to about, if you imagine that your bobbin was a compass, it comes to about where the south point would be, just underneath your bobbin. Hook it underneath there and take it all the way up that groove to the left-hand side. Yes, I'll just do that again and explain it again because I know it's really hard to see. I'll try and go in a little bit closer. There we go. So I'm going to drop my bobbin in here so that when I pull the thread, it goes in an anti-clockwise motion. I want to hook it underneath and then around and up. Okay. And then when you've done that, the next thing that we need to do is bring our bobbin thread up to the top to meet the spool thread up here. So to do that, what you need to do is hold your spool thread with a bit of tension with your left hand. And I just usually hold it kind of out to the left, out here. And then bring your wheel towards you. So I'm moving the wheel on the right-hand side of my sewing machine towards me. You'll see the needle going down. And then you'll see the thread go round and it will pick up and collect the bobbin thread from underneath. And then if I pull it again, you'll see a loop of the bobbin thread appear up here. So I'm going to pull that now, pull that loop, and now I've got both the spool thread and the bobbin thread by my presser foot on the top of the machine. So we'll just put them both underneath the presser foot here through that little front of the forked piece of the presser foot, and then we can put the bobbin case back on and we're good to sew. Okay, so that is threading up for the top and the bobbin for a top loading sewing machine. Let me just go and get my front loader that I've got just over there because I'll quickly show you that as well. For those of you that have got a front loader, front loader, sorry. Oops. I'd advise you to have a practice at home. I'm sorry. Several times, because like anything, the more you do this, the easier it's going to become for you. It just becomes kind of a habit really once you've done it several times. Okay, let's take this thread out and I'll quickly show you the front loader, then we can get sewing. I just saw somebody wrote about the needles. So sewing machine needles need to be replaced far more regularly than what you might think. I can't remember how many hours of sewing that you do. I think it's maybe 6 hours of sewing or something like that. And then you need to change. It's recommended that you replace your needle. Having a blunt needle is one of the most common reasons that your stitching will start to change and will start to be loopy or start to miss stitches on your sewing. So that's usually the first thing I do is I unthread it and rethread it. The second thing I do as long as I'm using the same thread for my top and bottom, is to change the needle and make sure I've got a nice sharp needle in there. So you will have got some needles with your sewing machine. If not, you want to buy some new ones and make sure they're nice quality needles and they are universal. I can't remember the number, I always get mixed up, but it's on your handout that I'm going to send you at the end. Use different thicknesses of needles for different types of fabrics, but kind of the standard regular ones, I think they're 90, I can't remember, are the ones that you want to use at the beginning. That was another thing I was just going to say then. It'll come back to me in a minute. Okay, right. So let's do a front loader. It's a bit lower down, it's a bit tricky. So with a front loading bobbin case, you'll have a little trap door here, which has got a bobbin case in it that looks like this. So if I turn it, it's got a handle on it on this side. If I pull that handle out, these are really fiddly. There's a handle there that you can grip it by. And then at the back, it looks like this. You want to drop your bobbin into the bobbin case so that when you pull the thread, it goes around in a clockwise fashion. If you drop your bobbin in and then you pull out this little handle, it will mean that your bobbin doesn't fall out of your bobbin case. If I was to release that handle, the bobbin would just fall out. So if you make sure that when you've got your bobbin in, you hold that handle out. And then you'll see around the metal casing of this bobbin case, at one point, there's a little nick in the metal. You want to take your thread and pull it through that nick in the metal and then underneath this plate on the side until your thread is then coming out of this hole on the outer top edge, the side edge of the bobbin case. Okay, there we go. And once that's happening, you can then put your bobbin case back into your machine with this prong here facing north. And you'll see as you put it into the machine underneath here that there's a gap for that prong to sit in like that. And once you've done that, you can do exactly the same as what we did before on the other machine. So hold your spool thread with a bit of tension with your left hand and then bring the wheel towards you, and then you'll see the spool thread go down, and collect the bobbin thread so that it's then up on top of the machine with the spool thread. So that is how you thread or load a bobbin for a front loading sewing machine. Okay, right. Just put this back in here so I don't lose it, and then we'll swap machines again and we can get on to some sewing. We'll have a little bit of a practice first, and I'll just show you the things that I'd recommend you do when you're having a practice sew. Okay, I'm going to quickly. Oh, I've got the wrong foot on this machine. Let's change that. Yes, actually, I can show you that. That's quite an interesting thing for you to see. So at the moment, I've got a zipper foot on this sewing machine because I was sewing a little zipped bag the other day. Oh, where's my screwdriver? I don't know where my screwdriver's gone. Oh well. So a zipper foot looks different to a regular foot in that it's got a much narrower, so you can stitch up nice and close to your zip. But what you will need to do, I don't know where my screwdriver is. I'm going to use a pair of embroidery scissors. I'm sorry, that's totally the wrong thing to do. Oh no, I don't even need to. It's not taken. Okay, so I'm going to undo the screw here, which you might need to do when you change to certain feet. So some feet just clip in and out of that little claw, like I showed you before, and some feet are actually have got this kind of top bit as well that clip around this central prongy bit. And so you might need on occasion to actually undo that screw to put different feet in. But like I say, some of them will just be using the lever at the back to unhook and drop onto this main housing bit here. So let's put this bit back on. So I'll start, sorry, it's hard to do it back to front. Start doing the screw back in. I'm going to hook this under. And then tighten the screw. Another thing actually, which I just reminded myself of, so that this lever under here that lowers and raises the presser foot, if ever you need a bit of extra height, say you have some really thick fabric that you need to get under your sewing machine or something, if you keep pushing that lever up further, it will give you a little bit of extra height underneath the presser foot, and raise it up a little bit even higher for you. It's quite useful sometimes to do that. Right, I'm going to thread up the sewing machine again so I can give you another quick demonstration. So on the top up here, underneath the first piece of metal and straight down. So you can see what it looks like, slightly different on this machine. So the tension dial for this machine is down here, down and then up again. And as if you can remember, that metal prong, there's nothing to be seen here. So if I bring the wheel towards me until I see that wheel appear, God, where's it gone? There it is. Oh, this one doesn't come up quite as high. See that little prong appear, hook the thread underneath, straight back down the way we just came, and then you can thread your needle at the bottom. Actually, that's another really important thing to mention. Another thing to check, again, this is on the handout, but if your stitching suddenly goes a little bit funny and loopy and knotty, first thing you do is rethread. And one of the really common things that happens is that sometimes your thread can come unhooked from this hook here, at the top of your sewing machine, on the far top left hand side of your sewing machine. It's quite common that happening, so that when double check that your thread is still hooked under that loop of metal there, because that could be one of the reasons. Oiling, yes, Selena, that's all on I've got a lovely maintenance video that I'm going to send you when I send you the handbook and the video for this workshop. And I've included all of that on there for you, so you can watch that. It's quite a quick video compared to this one. So you can watch that and stay on top of the maintenance on your video, on your sewing machine. Oh, the main thing, your main enemy is dust and lint. So you want to make sure that you keep your dust cover on your sewing machine, whenever you're not using it. And then clean it out and oil it fairly regularly, as well as changing the needle. But it's all on the other video, so don't worry. Does the bobbin thread pass over the top of the bobbin, or should it be just under the top plastic disc of the bobbin? Under the bobbin disc. So I don't know what you mean. Bobbin thread pass over the top of the bobbin. Yes, sorry, yes. It is going just over the top of the bobbin. That does make sense now. Correct. That's fine. If it's going slightly over the top of the bobbin, you're all good, Claire. Thank you. Right, we are threaded up. We're on. Let's stitch select. So I'm going to select stitch number 1. So I've just pressed my stitch selector arrow to number 1. I can see number 1 is now in my screen here. It says my stitch length, so it's got a straight line that gets shorter than longer, is on 2.5. I'm happy with that, but if you're just starting, you might want to make it slightly bigger. So you might want to make that a 3 or even a 3.5 if you're just starting out. And then my stitch width is, we don't have a stitch width when it's zigzag, when it's a straight stitch, because it's just a straight line. But I need my needle to be in the center position. So that's automatically set, and that on this machine is 3.5. So we don't want to mess around with that for this. Okay, let's just pop a little piece of scrap fabric under the sewing machine. And how are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing okay. We've done the bulk of it. We're nearly there, really. So I'm going to pop the scrap fabric underneath here. Make sure you're sitting nice and squarely at your sewing machine. Just have a little bit of a practice. So these are the types of things that you want to practice. Put your fabric underneath your sewing machine. Always make sure you've got 2 layers, because that's the type of you're not going to be sewing with just one layer of fabric. So remember I said do your first stitches by bringing the wheel towards you. So can you see if I do that, the first stitches happen manually. So I always get into the habit of doing that. And then when you're happy, you can hold your fabric and you just want to be steering left and right. You're not pushing or pulling through your machine, and just gently put your foot down on the pedal and you'll start sewing. So you want to practice doing nice straight lines. You want to practice doing corners. So to do a corner, you need to make sure that your needle is downwards in the lower position. If it's not, you will either move the wheel towards you until the needle is in the lower position, or if you have a needle up, down button, you can press it until the needle is down. And then you want to raise the presser foot by lifting up this lever in here whilst the needle is down, and then you can just pivot to whatever new direction you want to sew in, lower the presser foot, and then off you go again. You can try doing some curves as well if you'd like to. And then the other thing that you need to practice is reverse. So hold down this reverse button, and for the duration of your sewing, whilst you've got the button pressed down or the lever, you'll go backwards. Ooh, put my foot down on the pedal again, sorry. There we go. So you want to do just 2 or 3 stitches backwards, and then that's going to secure your sewing in a nice knot that's nice and neat and secure. When you've finished having a bit of practice of doing that for a while, you can then raise your needle up by pressing the needle up button or moving the flywheel towards you, and then raise up the presser foot by lifting that lever, and then gently pull the fabric out. If you're met with a lot of resistance when you're pulling your fabric out, it means that the needle is not in the uppermost position. So keep bringing this magic wheel over here that cures lots of problems. Keep bringing that towards you until the needle's as high as it can go, and then you should find that your fabric comes out nice and freely. What it means is that your machine is still part way through doing a stitch, basically, so it's not ready for you to pull the fabric out until the needle is in the uppermost position. Okay, so if you have a bit of a practice, and then we can go to the fabric that we prepared at the very beginning of the session. So here we go, start with the pin side. So the first 2 hems that we want to do are the 2 hems that we've already pinned and pressed if you're at home in place. And I want to do these 2, we've already worked out the seam allowance with the fold, and actually with the sewing this time, I want to make sure that the sewing is quite close to that innermost fold. So I will, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the left-hand side of the presser foot with the left-hand side of the fold, I think, and then we'll sew down there. So I can take the first pin out already, pop the fabric underneath, and you want to have it so that the start of the fabric is roughly in line with the end of your presser foot, maybe a little bit further forward. Fabric forward, not presser foot forward. And then we're going to do, and I've got the left hand side of my presser foot lined up with the left hand side of this fold. I'm going to do a couple of stitches manually as per usual, and then we'll do a few stitches backwards to go back to the beginning of the fabric. So reversed button in, and then let's do a few stitches to go back, and then off we go. And we can sew all the way down. So I'm going to stop before I get to this pin, but because we've pinned in the right position, we can just keep going. Next pin out. And then when we get to the end, again, reverse, do a couple of stitches of reverse, needle up, and then trim your thread. You should all have thread cutters on the side, the left-hand side of your machine here. If not, you can use embroidery scissors. Okay, so that's the first hem done. Let's do exactly the same on the other one that we've pinned in place. Okay, so exactly the same as what we just did. So we'll start off manually, do a few reverse, and then off we go. Oh, I'm not sitting perfectly squarely onto my machine, as you can probably tell, just so that you can see properly. So my stitching might not be as, don't judge me, might not be as straight as it should be. And then reverse, needle up, there we go. Okay, and then we've just got two, so jersey fabric. Rachel, you'll find that the best, so normal machine needles are obviously quite sharp and pointy, but for jersey fabric, you'll want to use a ballpoint needle. And so what that will do is, instead of sort of slicing through the fabric, it will find its way through the fibers of the fabric instead. So use a ballpoint needle, and the you shouldn't really need to adjust the tension. It depends on what type of fabric you're using though. I might speak to the crafting outlet and see if I can do a special series on things like that, because you can go into quite a lot of detail. There we go, that's enough for today. Don't want to confuse you all. Okay, another top tip is, as you're sewing, you'll have long threads like this. Trim them as you go, because it's much easier, keeps everything much neater as you go along, rather than trying to trim them all off at the very end. So that's all of my edges, ends of thread trimmed off. Now you want to have your fabric laying in front of you, right side up. You can't tell with this because it's white fabric both sides, so you can see my stitching. But if it was this fabric, I would have it with this side of the fabric facing up, not that side. And then you want to fold over one of the edges of the fabric to about what is it? Oh, it's the width of your cushion times about 3/4. So about like so the width times about 0.75 or 0.7. So that's as long as you want this is basically where the envelope overlap is going to go on your cushion. You might want it so that the envelope overlap on the back of your cushion is right at the edge, in which case you'll fold that overlap much further. It's completely up to you, but as long as you fold one side over and then fold the other side over, and what we're going for here is the width between those two folded ends needs to be the length of between those two folded edges needs to be the final length of your cushion. I think this one was 20 centimeters, and that is a slap bang on 20, which is good. Okay, so check the measurement at the bottom, the middle, and the top. Miraculously, this is absolutely spot on, so that's good. And then when you're happy, I would put a little pin in the middle just to hold things in place. And then the final two pieces of stitching are going to be down this side and down this side with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So let's pop some pins down this edge. So again, just remember, you've got the bulk of the fabric to your left and the points of the pins facing away from you. You're going to have a little bit of bulk here to navigate over, but that's fine. We'll tackle that in a minute. And then same on the other side, the points of the pins away from you. Oops. And the bulk of the fabric to the left. Okay, so we'll take it back over to the sewing machine, and here we go. This time we're going to sew with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So I'm going to line up the raw edge on the right hand side with that 1.5 line on the plate underneath my presser foot. You might, if you find it hard to see that line, something that I do sometimes is I'll get some masking tape or something and just add a little piece of masking tape to the plate underneath your sewing machine, underneath your presser foot, sorry, I'm just trying to do it now so that I can show you. Here we go. And then it will, you can kind of just mark up that 1.5 centimetre line like this, and it makes it it's a much easier, you know, just makes it much easier for you to follow rather than trying to keep your eye on this line, which is actually quite tricky to see. It's easier to keep your edge of your fabric lined up with that edge of the masking tape, and then you can just take it off if you're making something else. So you might find that quite handy. Okay, so fabric down, a couple of stitches. Oh, another tip actually, whilst I remember, when you start any piece of sewing, occasionally when you start your sewing and you lower down the presser foot and then you start stitching, the threads all kind of just find their right tension and their right place within the sewing machine. And sometimes that will suck the top thread, the spool thread, back into the sewing machine a little bit as it kind of finds its tension. So it will become unthreaded. And it's really, really frustrating. So if you pull slightly longer tails of thread to begin with, and also sometimes just hold on to them as well as you do the first couple of stitches with the wheel, it means that you stop that from happening. I've seen those magnetic guides, Bernie. I think I need to get one because they look really good. So it's a bit like just popping on the masking tape, but it's magnetic, so it sits to the metal plate under your presser foot, underneath, you know, beside your stitching. So you can move it around. You don't have to pull the tape up. You can just move it around, and you can make sure that you've lined up your seam allowance properly. Okay, so a few stitches in reverse, and then we're going to sew all the way down, keeping it so you can see I'm not pushing at all. I'm just steering left and right to make sure that the edge of my fabric is lined up with the masking tape, or the 1.5 line. You want to stop just before you get to this change in fabric depth, where you've got the extra pieces of fabric for this piece that goes across the middle. And just with your needle down, just lift up the presser foot and just double check that that piece, the extra pieces of fabric, are sat nice and squarely underneath your presser foot. And then you can carry on sewing. So you can hear the difference there, can't you, when it's sewing through extra layers of fabric. And then when we get to the bottom, a little bit of reverse, needle up, presser foot up, and there we go. There's that. And then turn around, and the final piece of stitching, exactly the same on the other side. What I'm going to show you this time, I'll do it at the other end. So a couple of stitches manually, reverse, I'm going to stop just before I get there, press the foot up, just check that we're nice and flat, and then keep going. Now this time I'm just going to quickly show you that tip for if you don't want to do reverse. You just sew right to the end, lift your needle up, and then just pull the fabric out without doing any reverse, but make sure that you leave quite long tails of thread here. And then what you would do, instead of doing the reverse to secure your stitching and stop it from becoming unthreaded, is you can just tie the two ends of thread in a knot. At the end of a piece of fabric like this, you can just literally tie them together. But if you are on stopping midway, say we stopped over here, you wouldn't be able to do that. So what you do in that case is you pull, what's happened here quite nicely, you pull one of the threads, so bright, well there we go, you pull one of the threads until you see a loop come up. You can just take a pin and pull that loop, and then both threads will be on the same side of the fabric, and you can just tie those two threads in a double knot. And that method is not probably quite as secure as doing reverse, but it means you have less bulk and it's sometimes quite a lot neater. So if you've got nice flimsy fabric, or you want to make sure that you're not seeing a couple of lines of stitching go over each other, you might want to use that technique instead. Okay, we're done. We've finished sewing. Isn't that good? Honestly, the sewing part of it is really, really speedy. So you will, if you want to make more of these cushion covers, it's such a nice beginner's project because you'll feel really satisfied without too much trouble. So trim off the ends of the thread again. If you've got slightly thicker fabric, you might want to cut a very slight bit of your fabric off in the corners. This is really thin fabric, so I'm not going to bother doing that. I probably wouldn't make one that's just out of white sheeting usually, but there we go, just for the purposes of today. And you can turn it the right side out, push the corners out. You can use a knitting needle or a ruler or something. There we go. Pull it flat. There we go. Cushion cover done. Ta-da! See if I've got a nice, I think I have actually got an example of a bit more of a jazzy one to show you so you can see the types of things that you can do. So is it in here? Oh no, it's not. That's annoying. And then here perhaps. Oops. No, don't know where it's gone. Not to worry. But if you can imagine, you had really lovely fabric, and I've added pom-poms on the corners before and tassels and things like that. So yeah, you can do all sorts of things. There we go. Right, how are we doing? Oh, 2 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay, so Alan, is there a specific foot I use when fabric is very thick and won't sew using a normal presser foot? A normal presser foot should be fine for most fabrics. However, if you've got multiple layers of fabric, you know the feed dog that I told you about that pull the fabric through the machine. If you've got thick fabric or multiple layers of fabric, you might find that the top layers don't go through at quite the same rate, and you're more prone to things like puckering and for it being slightly uneven. So you can get something called a walking foot. Have I got one here? I don't think I do. No. So a walking foot it has kind of a white box sort of attached to it. You attach it onto your sewing machine in a slightly different way, but it kind of mimics the action of the feed dog underneath the presser foot on the top as well. So it means that your fabric will all go through at the same rate and you'll have much more neat and even stitching. So if you've got very thick like fabric or lots of layers of fabric, you might want to think about using a walking foot. Actually, on one of my other sewing machines that I have in my other sewing room, I have my walking foot on pretty much all the time because I actually really like using the walking foot. So that might be something worth considering. They're really, really good. Does your guide have cover all different foot types? No, it doesn't, Mike, but I'm starting to do a bit more work with the sewing outlet and the crafting outlet, which is I think where most of you got your machines from. And I'm going to put to them that we make lots more different videos for all different types of feet so I can cover them off for you. So if you sign up to my mailing list, makerykate.com, I will make sure that I share all those videos with you. Okay, so dropping the feed dog, I'll quickly cover that. So you can use your sewing machine, obviously, to construct items, any items, clothes or accessories or whatever it is. But you can also use it in a completely different way by doing free motion embroidery, which is absolutely amazing. It's such a lovely way to use your sewing machine, but it's a very, very different way of using your sewing machine. So what you do is you kind of use the thread to make pictures and to make art and do drawings instead. So you move your fabric around completely freely underneath your presser foot, but you have a special type of free motion or darning foot. You move it around freely to make the shapes or do the writing or draw the pictures with your thread. It's really, really effective. It's amazing. But it's quite tricky. It's quite a skill. So I definitely wouldn't start there, but it's a nice way of you know, if you really love using your sewing machine, it's a nice thing to think about maybe moving on to. So to do that, if you imagine those feed dog underneath the sewing machine that are pulling the fabric through in a straight line, you want to lower those feed dog if you want to move the fabric around freely. So it depends on what type of sewing machine you've got as to how you would lower those feed dog. On a front loader, you open up the little door and there's a little hook that you move left and right. On most other machines like this, there'll be a little switch here that you either move left or right, and that's going to raise or lower the feed dog. Let me just check this in here to see if it's the same. Oh no, it's not. I don't know where it is on this one. Let me have a look. Might have to come back to you because I've not done it before on this machine. Helen, I'm going to come back to you on that because I don't know where you do it on this machine. I've not lowered them on this one before. Come back to you on that. Yes, I talk about zigzag on the handout, so that's all good. And how to use a needle on the left, right side of the foot. Yes, that's fine. I'll cover zigzag on there. What I would say to you is just select a zigzag on your machine though, and just, you know, when you're practicing doing straight lines, corners and reverse, practice doing a bit of zigzag as well, and just play around with the stitch width and stitch length to see how that alters the size of the zigzag on your machine. I think, wow, we have covered a lot. Sorry, I know that's so much for you to take in, but you know, you'll be okay, and you get the video so you can watch back in your own time. The walking foot, I can't go through that because I haven't got one here, but the walking foot, you have to attach it slightly differently. I'll speak to the crafting outlet, see if we can do some videos on that for you. If not, I'll just do them myself. Anyway, right, so what I'm going to do after this, it takes a little while for the video to download. As soon as it has done, I will send you the video with the handbook and the video for maintenance. I also need to send you the how to drop the feed dog on the Singer for Helen. Buttonholes is a whole new thing. I'm not going to go into those today, but this is good. Write all these things down and I will note that we need to do this. So buttonholes, walking foot. And yes, I'll send all of those to you in the email. If you have any questions, if there's anything else that I've not covered that you would like me to go over, please reply to my email and put them in the email, and then I can either get back to you with an answer, or I can record something else or work with Crafting Outlet on something else and help you along, because nothing makes me happier than helping people on their sewing journeys. And actually, on that point, if you do make a cushion cover or anything else, I would love to see a picture of it. So you can please send me a picture if you want to. I'd love to see, or you can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I'll put the links on the email, and tag me if you make anything. I would love to see it. I promise you, it makes my day. But yeah, hopefully this has been helpful to you. I know we've got so many people with all different machines, so I try and make it as inclusive as I possibly can. Yeah, hopefully it's been helpful, and good luck everybody. I hope you enjoy sewing as much as I do, and yeah, can't wait to see what you get up to. Thank you so much. Take care. Lots of love. Bye bye.